Welcome to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where, like Dave Portnoy, we would gladly accept a job as Donald Trump's next press secretary. I'm speaking for both of us. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That is Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. Back for another week. Paul versus Tyson on Netflix. Inside the NBA moves to ESPN, and Bluesky is back again. Ben, I think this is the meatiest, most packed show we have done in 2-3 months of doing the play-by-play.
Yeah, I mean, some weeks it's a fight to find 3 topics. Sometimes it's a fight to find 1 topic. Sometimes you just have slow, weeks where there's not a lot that seems pod worthy. This, we had to trim some topics in this one. Like, we easily could have spent time talking about Deion Sanders and the Dallas Cowboys rumors. We had
a whole breaking news interview we weren't even going to have room for. It ended up getting pushed, but we were going to turn down that opportunity because of how much insanity happened in the world of sports media this week. So,
yeah.
All right, Ben, let's get to our instant replay of the week, where I'm not positive we actually could watch an instant replay of the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight on Netflix last Friday night. Very, very hotly anticipated, pushed back, millions and tens of millions of dollars at stake, and we can get to the broadcast as much as we were able to parse it and some of the ramifications that could be upcoming for Netflix. But as I was kind of watching the reactions across, First Take and Dan Patrick and Colin Cowherd and everybody sort of chiming in here, maybe it's just because it was 3 days ago by the time anyone had a chance to weigh in on Monday. Maybe it was just, let's cut to the chase. But the disastrous technical side of this, I actually think is getting completely blown past. Like, this just didn't work. We couldn't watch it. And this is a company not only that has a lot of sports rights coming, but that we've been hailing as the future for a friggin' decade at this point, and this was their one shining moment, and they absolutely dropped the ball, and it feels like everybody just sort of wanted to talk about Tyson being old or his ass or Jake Paul being goofy or whatever we wanted to do. This was humiliating for Netflix. This was atrocious. I couldn't even sit there and get through it. I probably would have turned it off if I didn't know we were going to be talking about it here today.
Yeah, I was tasked with reviewing the whole ordeal, and my assignment was to review the commentary, the presentation, like how Netflix sports looks as a live event. And my review just wound up being about the technical difficulties because it was such a barrier for entry that I couldn't clear. That it felt disingenuous to sit there and complain about Mario Ronaldo's forced pop culture references, or him and Roy Jones Jr. continually bickering about why Mike Tyson was biting his glove. Like, this was the story to come out of this event, was you couldn't watch it. It was not a watchable product. I mean, by the end, you pretty much had like a meth streams quality version of the main event up on the screen, and you could kind of see what was going on. But at least from everyone I talked to, everyone I saw on social media, and in my own anecdotal experience, like, this was like, all right, you're watching it, it's going to buffer, it's going to crap out around 25%, and you're going to have to restart it every 5 minutes or close to it. And that, I think you're right, that's the story of all this. And it's so fascinating because this isn't ESPN Plus, this isn't Peacock, this isn't CBS Sports's Paramount app. This is Netflix. Like, you're right, this is supposed to be the giant. And for all of this praise that's been heaped on Netflix and the crowning of them as the king of streaming, they seem to be the only one that hasn't figured out live streaming while all of the competitors do. And with this NFL, the Christmas Day doubleheader coming up, like, this is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, I thought that actually some of the elements of the broadcast, yes, it was a circus. Yes, it was very contrived. I mean, we knew that going in. I don't think we needed until Friday night to know that an age disparity that is more than double was going to be a little bit goofy, and that the fight itself might fall short of any sort of epic legendary thing we're going to be telling our kids about. But that all set aside, like, I thought the little pre-produced segment that they did showing Tyson's history and career was, for somebody like me that has seen most but not all of it, and it was a helpful recap, not to mention people significantly younger than me. Like my cousin was watching with my parents and they were texting me. He had basically no idea who Mike Tyson was. Like some of those things were, I thought, very well done. I thought that the flow of who they were going to, whether it was the panel with Kate Abdo or the ringside before the match of Morrow and Rosie Perez and Roy Jones, then some of the interviews with the celebrities that were there, cut to the dressing room. I thought it was actually, it moved. It's a long night, and I thought from the Serrano Taylor fight through the end, I thought that element of it worked for me. Just the vibe of it, kind of the pacing, everything else. Whoever's in the truck was doing a good job, I guess. But what did you think of the talent here? I mean, if you agree or disagree on the energy of it, I think that could be good too. But the talent, I think, got a lot of attention here.
Yeah. Well, real quick, I actually think that's what made this such an interesting test for Netflix, because let's say someone your age is watching it with your dad. Your dad doesn't really know who Jake Paul is. And you have an idea who Mike Tyson is, but you don't know about everything necessarily that it was like growing up with Mike Tyson in his prime. And so this was like a really interesting contrast of how do you tell this story when most of your audience is really only going to be familiar with the full story of one of the fighters. And I thought Netflix passed it. And so I think if you want to spin this positively for Netflix, I think they really only need to figure out the technical side. Like, I think they could make improvements to the production side and in terms of the talent. Like, Mauro Ranallo is not my favorite, and I'm familiar with him from pro wrestling, and he wasn't my favorite there. I'm not into that over the top, enthusiastic Gus Johnson type of broadcasting. And so, like, if we want to talk about the talent, that, and I didn't think Roy Jones Jr. was great. I did like Rosie Perez in the booth, though. I thought that was a nice addition and a nice contrast to the booth. But like, they could make improvements there, and you would suspect that they will. But I do think if you want to spin this as a positive for Netflix, like, if they can just get past that major hurdle of allowing people to watch their product, like, I think they have a pretty good product, besides, the entire event being a de facto freak show.
Yeah, the Cedric the Entertainer part of it, I think, was the weakest point. He didn't really. There's always that awkward thing when you bring a celebrity in and you end up kind of being able to tell they didn't super want to be there. It's like, obviously, I'm sure he could provide commentary on the circus side of it. He said in the moment he's been around tons of Tyson fights and everything else. Like, okay, but he was there for the check is sort of what it felt like. No shade towards Cedric, but that part was a weak point, and people had a lot of criticism for that panel overall. I thought Ariel Helwani did a great job. I think that he tied together the biting of the ear nonsense, or the biting of the glove nonsense, to let Tyson land the joke of, I have like an oral fixation or whatever, which kind of harkened back to the Holyfield fight and everything. And, he did a great job at the weigh-ins, milking that slap and the toe stepping and all the kind of fallout there. So I think shout out to him. I'm never fully sure with a situation like this. I'm sure Netflix had a say in who the talent was, but it's probably not solely up to them because they're working with Most Valuable Promotions. And I mean, I think Jake Paul probably has a large hand in a lot of this with his kind of contrived fights. So I don't know how hard to come down on Netflix on that side of it.
It was a lot of the guys who were involved with the previous Jake Paul fights. And so that's Ariel was involved. I know they had a fight in Cleveland that I covered a couple of years ago, and Ariel was heavily involved in that. I believe Mauro has called a couple of them, or at the very least, there's that link with Showtime Boxing that has done some of Jake Paul's fights previously. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of get the sense that's how Netflix is going to handle this. Like, it seems like they're kind of leaving it up, at least in terms of the NFL games coming up. Like, they're really putting it with WWE. I mean, WWE does all of its production in-house. It's basically a product that's ready to lease. And so that seems to be the model that Netflix is going for. And yeah, I would anticipate, I don't know like how many Netflix exclusive broadcasters we're going to see. It seems like something where it's going to be dependent on what the production is, and they'll work hand in hand with whatever the entity is that's doing it.
Probably why people have long kind of connected them to UFC as well when those rights come up, because it's also a little bit plug and play. It feels like that's probably partly what you can blame for the technical difficulties. I doubt that this is a whole Netflix team that is trying to do this. I don't know if it's a server problem. I don't know if it is a quality problem where they're like, my parents, for instance, this is the most not legitimate reporting I can possibly do on this, Ben, but my parents had no issues because they watched it on one of the iPads in the house that was like several years old. So tiny screen, old technology. It didn't buffer or lag for them at all once they switched from the TV to that, is what I heard, and it felt like I was seeing some of that online. But I was watching it on a pretty old Apple TV and a pretty old TV screen, and that didn't really help me at all. So, I mean, you and I aren't production whizzes, but I don't know why this is so hard for them compared to those other companies you've talked about. Peacock's done an NFL game, all these things. Why can't Netflix do it?
Peacock does WWE pay-per-views or PLEs once a month. Like they do WrestleMania, and I watch most of them. I can't remember any major issues with any of those. Paramount does Champions League games on a fairly regular basis. I mean, there is a lot of live programming on these streaming apps. And so the fact that Netflix is the one, you said you weren't sure if it was a Netflix issue. It's hard to give them the benefit of the doubt because that Love is Blind finale or reunion show was such a disaster. Like that kind of set the gold standard for this. And so the fact that they weren't prepared for this, whatever it was, whether it was server or some other technical difficulties, that to me raises a lot of red flags. And again, like we have an NFL doubleheader coming up here on Christmas Day. It's going to be watched by probably more than 60 million people. We think at this point, like this is a massive test. And if they don't pass it, like, I think there's real questions about where they fit in to the hierarchy when it comes to the streaming wars.
Well, so you mentioned the Love is Blind catastrophe, which was their first big live event ever, only about a year and a half ago, but they've done several since, and that one crashed and burned. It pretty much didn't ever go live as far as what I can remember, and what digging back through it, they ended up, some people were maybe getting through, and then they ended up just uploading a final version of it and kind of posting it on the app at that point, and they had to like issue an apology or kind of a letter to their investors, and it really, really went sideways for them. And I went back and looked at the quote from the earnings call after that, which co-CEO Greg Peters said the issues at that point in time were due to a bug that we introduced when we implemented some changes to try and improve live streaming performance after the Chris Rock special, which was a little bit lower production quality. It's a comedy special. You just point a camera at a guy, you have 4 angles, and you go for it. And so they were trying to, get better from there. And he said, we just didn't see this bug in internal testing because it only became apparent once we put multiple systems interacting with each other under the load of millions of people trying to watch Love is Blind. We hate it when these things happen, but we'll learn from it and get better. Clearly not. Clearly not. They're not going to figure it out and get better. And this just continues to be a problem for them. And I kind of had it, Ben, as the first real failure of the streaming sports era. Like, it's kind of impressive we didn't have one of these sooner. If you think about it, like how much pressure there was on Prime Video, for instance, with the first Thursday night football game, which was probably kind of patient zero in all of this. I mentioned the NFL wildcard game on Peacock, which was earlier this year. I threw in Gold Zone on Peacock with just so many different games going on and the cutting and all that, but really just all the exclusive live stuff that was on Peacock for the Olympics this past year in Paris. And then one that I don't think people necessarily pay a lot of attention to, but that is another platform managing this. You mentioned Paramount Plus. I think that could be in here too. But Disney Plus routinely streamed, I think they lost some of the rights last year, but they've had cricket rights in India and Cricket World Cup. And if you look at the numbers for that stuff, it's on par with this event, which Netflix said 60 million people watched. And we never hear about issues of all these Indian cricket fans getting angry at Disney Plus. Everybody can do it. Netflix just dropped the ball. And I know we keep harping on it, but they have a lot at stake here. They're the next thing. And this could not have happened at a worse time.
Even listening to that explanation you just read, like, it's kind of cringy. It's like, you're not some mom and pop shop. Like, you're Netflix. Like, it bugs and internal testing and all that. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, figure it out. You're putting on this super high profile event. People need to be able to watch it. People pay for it, even though they're not paying a $60 fee. They're paying a $15 or a $8 fee, whatever it is. And
I was going to say, meanwhile, you're raising prices like every year. You
right.
know, no one's going to have sympathy.
I do wonder, though, because you mentioned we've both mentioned, like, all these other entities that do it on a regular basis. This feels like something where Netflix just needs to do it on a regular basis. And we do have the WWE deal coming up here at the start of 2025. So they're going to be doing a live 2 to 3 hour show on a weekly basis here, starting in January.
Yeah,
and to me, like, right, like, that's one, they're going to have to figure it out. And then two, at the very least, like, that should give them at least some trial and error in terms of how they handle it in the future with big events like this, with more NFL games. You know, if they do get UFC, like, I do think just getting in the flow of doing it, as opposed to having one big quarterly event like they've seemingly been doing, I think that's probably going to help. And I do wonder if this podcast will just go in some sort of time capsule where it's like, remember that time, like, Netflix couldn't even stream the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight because
they're going to have said that after the Love is Blind thing.
Right. Well, that's what made this so baffling. And that's why you can't, this isn't just some one-off, right? This isn't us overreacting. This is like, hey, Netflix very clearly has a live streaming issue, and they're going to have to figure it out if they're going to be a major player. And we already know they are going to be a major player because they have the rights to Monday Night Raw in 6 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we would have assumed that this Christmas Day thing was the bridge to more purchasing of NFL rights, whether that's, you know, can we get an international game? Can we keep doing Christmas every year? And then eventually when the rights come up in I think 27 or 28, I think all of us were kind of thinking, yeah, Netflix will make a pretty substantial bid there. I mean, you know, I would hope we're not talking about this in 2028 anymore, but I guess that just brings me to this. So 60 million people estimated, although they released something else this morning, Ben, that it was like, well, 100 million people plus actually watched at least 1 second. I mean, we'll never know because these numbers are obscured on purpose, but let's just say 60 million. You had Jake Paul bragging that they broke the app as people are screaming about not being able to watch the thing. And these Christmas NFL games just announced Beyonce's coming at halftime. So
great timing.
Yeah. It's not only the Chiefs and maybe Taylor Swift being at the game and big matchups, but also now this Beyonce halftime thing. I think they're going to clear 60 for these games, considering the amount of people that are just sitting around with nothing to do on Christmas Day versus midnight on a Friday, which is still boxing, not exactly a sport everybody cares about anymore. This is the NFL. Do you think that these Christmas games are make or break for Netflix? I mean, the WWE thing's happening either way, but if there's even 75% of the issues, 20% of the issues that they had with this Jake Paul fight, the NFL is going to say, you're in timeout, in my opinion.
Yeah, and as much as I love WWE and pro wrestling and even freak shows like Tyson versus Paul, NFL is a different animal. And so it, like, I would imagine, I was just thinking as we were talking this out, like, the NFL has to have some sort of contingency backup plan for if this happens. Like, I wonder if they're going to be like, hey, switch over to the NFL Network. We're putting the game there because we're not going to deprive you of your football on Christmas. Like, we're just not. Like, we are the NFL. You are going to watch our product, and it's going to be somewhere. And if Netflix can't do it, we'll just put it on our own channel. Like, I agree. Like, if they screw up this Christmas Day game, I would give I'd give Netflix pretty long odds whenever the NFL's next media rights deal comes up, because this is not something that's forgivable if you cost NFL fans their football on Christmas. I'm dead serious.
As Howard Stern said, right? I mean, like, take it from Howard Stern as he went viral this week for saying there's hell to pay if you mess with people's football, especially on Christmas Day, which is already this stretch that the NFL is now doing to kind of take that holiday from the NFL, play these midweek games, or from the NBA, play these midweek games and everything else. Yeah, I think that it's going to be very big. We know that CBS is doing the production for these games. The talent is kind of pulled from different spots. And I would imagine, similar to Prime Video for Thursday nights, that in Kansas City and Pittsburgh, and I'm blanking on what the other matchup is, but the 4 local markets are going to probably be watching this game on their CBS local affiliate. Yeah. So like you're saying, with that kind of break glass in case of emergency backup plan, maybe if nothing else, the NFL just puts out a bunch of social media comments saying turn to your CBS affiliate and watch the game because Netflix is pulling a Paul-Tyson again. I mean, it would be crazy to get to that point, but I think you're right. Roger Goodell's not just going to let it fail.
Yeah. And you said CBS is doing the production, and so that's, I can't find anything firm as I try to Google it while we're talking, but obviously Showtime is under the Paramount banner too. And so I would have to think Showtime was somehow involved with Tyson versus Paul. So there is some sort of connection there, where it seems like that's who Netflix prefers to do their business with for whatever reason. So hopefully just everybody involved like gets this sorted out, and really Tyson Paul was like the trial and error that they needed to figure out how they're going to host like the biggest day of NFL games all season.
Let's hope so, because I'm looking forward to those games and was looking forward to just seeing that experiment. And I don't want to be talking about latency and buffering and iPads the next time that we are sitting down for that. Let's get into Inside the NBA at its new home. Our long national nightmare of talking about this with no details is over, Ben. And people can, by the way, check out awfulannouncing.com for tons of coverage of all of these things. I don't always say that, but we're just going to give our top-level takes. We're covering this minute by minute over on the website. But let's break down what this is actually going to look like, because I've seen even diehard NBA fans who kind of get how all this stuff works, and the fact that they need to check out different places for different games, still very confused. And I'm sure you can relate, Ben. So does this start with the lawsuit? I mean, this past summer, Warner Brothers Discovery sues the NBA for basically accusing them that they didn't play fair when it comes to the matching rights that Warner Brothers Discovery thought it had as a holdover partner broadcasting the NBA. And now this settlement is very wide-ranging, stemming off of that. Does that sound like point zero as we kind of do the timeline here?
Yeah, so basically in the last media rights deal, Warner Brothers Discovery had matching rights. The NBA went and signed deals with Amazon, NBC, and ESPN. And when Warner Brothers tried to match the Amazon portion of the deal, basically the NBA said, you can't match this. It's streaming only. We find value in it being streaming only. And so Warner in turn filed a lawsuit, to argue fair play or whatever.
So is somewhat of a settlement with the NBA and somewhat of just a side deal that got brokered with ESPN. And that's where the Inside the NBA part of this comes into play. So let's start there. Inside the NBA, there was all this discussion of, are they going to change networks completely? Could Charles Barkley's production company make the show and sell it? Are they individually as talent going to be jumping ship to this network or that network? Could NBC or Amazon swoop in and be a factor here? And instead, as has become very common for ESPN, they're going to basically license this show. TNT will continue to make it, produce it, pay for it basically out of the Atlanta studios that it always has aired from. And like the Pat McAfee show, or like the Manning cast, or any number of other programs that ESPN has kind of scooped up recently, they're going to license this show, and it will just air on ESPN some of the time. It will air on ESPN, it sounds like opening night, maybe opening week, Christmas, the final half of the season, those marquee weekend games. They said the final week of the season. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe they're meaning like the play-in tournament portion of the schedule leading into the playoffs, and then all throughout the postseason. And most importantly, because TNT never had the finals, through the NBA Finals, which of course ESPN and ABC air. And I guess give me your reaction to this show being on the biggest sports network after all the ifs, ands, and buts about everything else. It kind of just makes perfect sense that this is where we landed.
Yeah, it really seems like a logical conclusion. I think we all knew this was going to end in some sort of settlement. I think we talked about it on this show. Like, rich people just don't like going to deposition. And so, especially rich and powerful people. And so usually those two go hand in hand. But we all knew this was going to go this way in terms of a settlement. In terms of what the settlement looks like, I guess there's a part of me that's just like surprised how quickly it came together in terms of like, all of a sudden on a Saturday afternoon, we get like an errant tweet from Bill Simmons. And then I think Alex Sherman from CNBC was the first to report some of the details, but it's just like, I thought it would be a long drawn out process where it'd be like, okay, they're still going to do Inside the NBA, but they're going to have the ability to license it and so on and so forth. And it's just like, no, boom, Inside the NBA is now on ESPN. And I thought it was a great deal for Warner Brothers Discovery because they basically turned nothing into something. I mean, they were losing the NBA, and now not only do they continue Inside the NBA and have the ability to sell ads and things of that nature on it, they get free NBA rights, which they are free NBA highlights, which they say they're going to use to grow Bleacher Report and I'm sure, their social media followings. And they get like this package of 13 Big 12 football games and 15 Big 12 men's basketball games, basically to help them fill out their portfolio of sports because they're going to be losing the NBA from their programming schedule. So I just thought in terms of WBD, what they got out of this deal, like the fact that they went from losing the NBA to now basically filing this lawsuit and getting something out of it, and something significant out of it. I don't think that's nothing. I think that's a pretty big deal.
In the spirit of two very cliche ways to talk about this, I have some burning questions, and then we're going to go winners or losers. I mean, just go play the hits here. There's so many angles and sides to this that I think we'll try to cover as much ground as we can. One detail, though, that I think can get us into that is that Tom Friend, who covers just basketball in general for the Sports Business Journal, had a nugget that I thought was interesting, which is that the length of the agreement between Inside the NBA and Disney is what he referred to as an indefinite deal that depends on how long the crew, Barkley, Ernie, Shaq, Kenny, want to keep the show going. The idea of mixing talent is also undetermined, he says, which we can get into in a moment. But there's no this will happen for 10 years type of situation here. And the other side plot that has basically come out of this is that Shaq is next year, his contract is up. He will be a free agent. He's effectively kind of on the market right now. So this show made Shaq. He was very raw when he first came into media. He was not great on this show early on, in my opinion, and has really grown into his own, both, I think, kind of in the goofiness, but also, frankly, like talking about basketball, he's come a long way. I think he would be a commodity elsewhere. His contract has never been quite as constricting as the other guys. Like his podcast is through Playmaker, not Turner, for instance, or TNT Sports. And whereas, Barkley and Ernie have their show that is a TNT property, whatever, a little in the weeds, but he's probably the most likely to jump ship of anybody. That said, this show breaking up after this news feels crazy. Give me a 1 to 10 on how likely it is that Shaq returns and this thing goes to ESPN in its exact full form.
I think an 8 or a 9. Like, I think it's pretty high. I don't think Shaq is going anywhere. It sounds like he does have some hard feelings about the way this has all been announced because, they announced it as, hey, Inside the NBA is going to ESPN or it's being licensed to ESPN. And Shaq's over here saying, well, I'm not under contract, so you can't really say we're going there in our current form.
Order of operations issues a little bit there. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's Shaq. Shaq always seems to have something he's a little upset about or feels disrespected by, and so I think they'll sort that out. I think the other thing is, so on the surface, you would say this is a great time for Shaq to be a free agent. You have NBC and Amazon entering the NBA space. You now have ESPN. Although like that would be kind of messy if he were to go to ESPN. But I also think like the part that's flying under the radar in all of this is this was a settlement between the NBA and Warner Brothers Discovery, not Warner Brothers Discovery and ESPN. Yeah. So I think what that tells you is that the NBA has a very vested interest in keeping Inside the NBA going. I think if you were to say the NBA is a winner of this deal, one of the reasons why they're a winner is because they're keeping Inside the NBA going. And so if you're ESPN or if you're the NBA and Shaq hits free agency, I would imagine you're kind of leaning on NBC and Amazon and even ESPN and saying like, hey, we want Shaq at Turner. Like we really wouldn't love it if Shaq came over to NBC. Like we want to keep Inside the NBA intact. And so I think it makes too much sense. I think you're right. I think Shaq fits in with Inside the NBA, and I would be a little worried about what he might be like if left to his own devices on another show.
And I would say this helps his leverage, right? Because now he can say, this whole deal falls apart without me. Pay me what I was asking for. And now he knows that it's not some amorphous role that he's not exactly sure of. He can go to them and say, we're doing Inside the NBA still. You need me to make that show what it is. Let's get this done. So that actually makes, I mean, it probably hurts TNT's, accounting, but I don't really care about that. I care about Shaq being on the show, and I think this makes that more likely for sure. So I would say same as you, 8, 9, 9.5, whatever. I think it's pretty close to a lock. Okay. I have one more burning question, and I agree with your first winner that you teased already, but I have one more, which is, do we expect, how much crossover do we expect here? Right? Because they actually already did this last year at the in-season tournament in Las Vegas. They had some swapping of like Stephen A. Smith played who he play for with the inside guys and everything. And I mean, there's now a formal relationship, even if ESPN is not Charles Barkley's employer. But are we getting Shaq on First Take in 2026? Are we getting Charles Barkley doing 5 good minutes on PTI with Kornheiser and Wilbon? Like, how much of this do you think will actually happen?
I think a lot, actually. I think you look at the best model we have would be Pat McAfee, and there's a fair amount of crossover. Like that, Pat McAfee is a licensed show, and if you were to watch it, obviously there's some sort of disconnect between him and ESPN, but it's largely ESPN talent that's being featured. There's exceptions, most glaringly when he was having Shams on, but he also used that influence allegedly to get Shams hired at ESPN. And so it is a weird setup, but it's also kind of becoming the norm for ESPN. But I would expect there to be more crossover with the Inside the NBA guys than we get with McAfee. And I think with McAfee, we get a decent amount. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it'll basically be up to the inside panelists. I feel like it'll, I think that Barkley is notoriously, persnickety. I don't know if I've used that word in a while, but that's what I would call him. And so, but at the same time, the dude loves to talk. Like he loves to go on shows. So, maybe it'll be a little bit like McAfee where he has his favorites and it's like, I'm not going on First Take because he has hammered the culture of debate and everything and over talking about the Lakers and all the things that First Take is. But maybe he, like I said, maybe it's PTI because he knows Wilbon, or maybe it's, there's not that many shows anymore. Maybe it is McAfee, or something like that. And then, I don't know, Kenny as a New York guy, maybe he goes on Get Up a lot or whatever, but I think it'll just be up to those guys how much they want to play nice.
Well, and I think Barkley, especially, like, he throws jabs, and I think he likes to portray himself in a certain way. But I don't think he would have any reservations about going on First Take and making fun of them for how much they talk about the Lakers.
That's true.
Like, I think, like, everything he does for the most part is that a contradiction? Everything he does for the most part, I think it is. Everything he does for the most part is good,
and you just go with it.
Yeah, let's just run with it. It's good natured, like it's not mean spirited. And so I think that he can portray himself a certain way, but at the end of the day, like, the dude loves a microphone, the dude loves the camera, and it's the worldwide leader in sports. Like, I think he'll be all over ESPN the airwaves, to be honest.
Okay, winners and losers. I'll just echo yours to kick us off on this, Ben, which is the NBA and its fans. I think that there is a subsection of the most analytical, nerdy, let's talk about X's and O's basketball media that kind of puts on a nice show about how much they hate inside the NBA and all that it represents. Fans love this thing. It's a ratings machine. It's beloved. It is those four guys are as synonymous with the NBA for the average sports fan as anything on TV right now, outside of maybe LeBron James and Steph Curry. Losing this would have been a disaster. And it's no surprise that Tom Friend of SBJ had the nugget that the NBA pushed to make this part of the deal happen. And it's no surprise that this thing lived to see another day. And I think we're all better off for it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that it's clear that this was the tightrope the NBA was walking, was how do we dump Warner Brothers Discovery and keep inside the NBA going? And so I think that they obviously managed to do that. And another part of it is they effectively keep Warner Brothers Discovery, TNT Sports, whatever you want to call it. They need to figure that out, by the way. As somebody who's written about this like 100 times, like, it's TNT, it's TBS, it's TNT Sports, it's Warner Brothers Discovery. Like, they need to figure out what their name is. It's absurd. Anyways, but they keep them as a media rights partner. And so it's like, now you have this media rights deal with Amazon, with ESPN, with NBC, and effectively with TNT still, even though you're not giving them any games. And so I think it's a huge win for the NBA, and you avoid deposition. So I don't think this lawsuit could have gone better for the NBA.
Okay, you can go winner or loser. What's your next one?
I'm going to go loser from a perception standpoint, at least. I think it's ESPN. I think even though you're getting inside the NBA in some sort of weird whatever capacity it's going to be, it's going to be really interesting to see how they do this tight walk rope with NBA Countdown. But you're basically admitting, like, you couldn't ever come up with an answer to inside the NBA. And they've been trying for as long as I can remember as an NBA fan, going on 20 plus years, to have an answer to inside the NBA. They've tried Bill Simmons. They've tried Stephen A. Smith. They've tried all these iterations, and they've just never figured it out. And so now, yeah, they're getting it on their airwaves, but you're basically admitting, like, we could never come up with our own version of this, and we're just going to have to license it to our airwaves.
I would argue they never tried.
I think they tried. I just don't think they could do it.
Well, what I mean is, format-wise, they never put a product on their air that could do the things that Inside the NBA did, which, by which I mean, like, the open, casual nature of the conversation, the flowing in and out of it, of NBA talk, the how long is it going to be on question that hangs over every episode of Inside the NBA. And I wonder, will those things actually happen still on the days when this show is now going to be on ESPN? I mean, I don't know how anyone agrees to this if that's not going to be the case, but ESPN seemed pretty freaking committed to its, Subway ad dollars and Nike ad dollars that it was getting when it was forcing Michael Wilbon to talk for 15 seconds at a time for the past 5 years. this is hugely different. So I guess I would say ESPN is I hear you that it is a loser, but I think that if it actually embraces what Inside the NBA is and just lets the show happen, it quickly becomes a winner because it basically admits defeat in the right ways, in my opinion.
That's fair. I do think too, if you want to talk about potential losers, like if I'm Stephen A. Smith, this isn't great.
Oh yeah, he was on my list.
Okay, yeah. Why don't you get into that then? Because I think when I was coming up with it, he kind of stood out as the most glaring one.
Well, I mean, so I'll say at the top, he's already come out and responded on his first podcast episode after ESPN officially announced this, saying that this doesn't affect him at all. But he is a politician. He's saying that, intentionally. I don't know if that means that he already has clarity on what it means for his future as one of the panelists on NBA Countdown for them right now, as he negotiates a new contract. Maybe he does already know that this doesn't matter to him, or he's just saying that to kind of maintain the high ground in these kind of talks that he's having. But yeah, I mean, this was one of the things that he had hitched his wagon to, as sports rights, live sports are increasingly the most important, if not the only important thing that matters to ESPN's bottom line. And I'm part of one of those sports. So that matters. I have more value as a result of that. Now, there will still be some of these games during the regular season where NBA Countdown still airs, but that takes a huge hit for Stephen A. to be able to tell ESPN what he's worth to them in a world where all they had to do was trade some Big 12 crap to now get a show that puts his value considerably below where it was a month ago. So I think I disagree with his own comments that he's fine here. I think that it does matter, and it might take a couple million off of whatever he can ask for.
Yeah, and if you're ESPN and you're saying we are going to lose Stephen A. Smith, how do we replace him? I think you replace him in the aggregate, and having the access now to the Inside the NBA guys, that gives you like a lot of leverage there. That gives you the potential to have Charles Barkley on First Take. That gives you the potential to have Shaquille O'Neal and Kenny Smith on your airwaves. And that's just another way, like, you can fill the massive void that Stephen A. Smith would leave behind. Wow, I think Stephen A. Smith is going to stay at ESPN. I think the only question is whether he's leasing his content to ESPN or whether he's still a full-time ESPN employee. And so maybe he's a winner because this just signals that's clearly the way ESPN is moving forward. But if you just want to look at it in a vacuum, I don't know how you could view Stephen A. Smith as a winner in this. I really don't.
Maybe it makes the conversations that we were hearing a while ago about his efforts to include his podcast as part of his deal with them. Maybe it brings some energy back to that side. I mean, the details on this have been few and far between because it's still not, his deal's not up till next summer. It is still a while away, but we'll see. I thought in the spirit of him being the ultimate wordsmith, I did think it was hilarious that he ended his comments on the podcast about this whole move with I look forward to welcoming all those guys to the channel that I work on for now. He said for now at the end of it with a very pointed emphasis there. But just to tie a bow on this, I had one very tiny winner, ESPN Plus.
They're losing all those Big 12 games.
Yeah, true. No, I would hope that they'll do what I imagine that they would do with whatever longer form stuff that I've been hoping they try to acquire, which Inside counts as, which is put 30 minutes of it on air and put the next hour or plus or whatever, like they do with McAfee's show, on ESPN Plus. The difference here, though, is they appear to kind of own the rights for the days that they are airing it, which means it would only happen there. There's no go to YouTube also version. And that could genuinely add some value to people trying to convince people to pay for a streaming service. If you say, hey, for the rest of Inside the NBA for the next hour or two, go to our app, and that's the only place that it'll be airing. So that's kind of an if, but I think that it could go there. I also had David Zaslav as a winner. I think TNT kind of made out like as well as you possibly could have hoped. They're paying no money for these Big 12 rights, which help their, tiny things, not tiny, their carriage fees, the amount of money they're getting per cable subscriber as they negotiate with Comcast and DirecTV and all these types of places. They are keeping this talent, which is no insignificant thing. They're getting an estimated, per the Wall Street Journal and The Athletic, $350 million in the next 5 years for continuing to operate and advertise for and provide talent for NBA TV and League Pass. The NBA is paying them money, a lot of money for a while here. The highlight rights, which you mentioned a minute ago, these are not insignificant things, as we've spent so much time kind of spinning our wheels on how does TNT pivot after David Zaslav, the guy who runs the place, basically stiff-armed the NBA and said, we don't need you as much as you think we do. I'm not saying we're there that he's right, but this is going pretty well as a plan B here for TNT in a post-NBA world starting next year.
Yeah, it feels weird to praise David Zaslav because he's become such a punching bag in the media space over the course of the last year or so, and for good reason in a lot of cases. But like I said earlier, like they could have just walked away from this. Like they could have just been like, "Oh shucks, we lost the NBA. This sucks. Like, what are we going to do next?" They dug their heels in. They filed a lawsuit. They drug this thing out. They were willing.
And we all laughed when they filed the lawsuit. Like, okay, guys, you're just embarrassed. You're trying to do damage control. This is PR.
Yeah, I mean, this is not insignificant. And even, I mean, you and I have both kind of snickered at the Big 12 rights, but like, hey, if they're putting, Arizona State against TCU on a Thursday night.
I was just going to say, I'll be snickering until I'm, it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm angrily turning on the channel or turning on Max to have to find yet another place to watch the damn conference that my school decided to be a part of because the Pac-12 fell apart. So
yeah, and it sounds like they're going to pretty prominently feature these games as a part of their plan to replace the programming they lost with the NBA. And so I think, look, I mean
Kansas basketball, Colorado football, it's not nothing.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what games they got because these were games that were pigeonholed to be streaming only at ESPN. Yeah. So like, we're not going to be getting like, I mean, who knows where Coach Prime will be by then, but it's going to be second tier Big 12 games, but like second tier college football games rate, like second tier college football.
Every Big 12 game is second tier. So they can get some decent fan bases at least. Yeah.
And so I do think though, just to put a bow on this, like, I think this is kind of WBD accepting its lot. And they're saying like, hey, we're not ESPN. We're not Fox Sports even, but we do have this collection of rights packages. We have the number 2 pro wrestling company. We have the French Open. We have some NASCAR, I believe. Like they are just they're like an NBA team that's rebuilding and they're just compiling assets and maybe they'll all fit and it will be a cohesive thing, or maybe they'll eventually have to trade off a bunch of pieces and figure out a new strategy. But I think for now, like in terms of where they were even just 2 months ago, like I think this is a big win for WBD.
So the other quick thing here is it sounds like TNT will develop this inside sports show that had kind of been teased since they lost the NBA, including this same cast, but maybe some kind of touring band of court jesters and whatever the 2 guys in Muppets who are sitting up in the theater and laughing at everything are, and they're going to go to the MLB playoffs on TBS, or they'll go to, they still have the March Madness tournament that those guys outside of Shaq are involved with, and college sports and everything else. Will people watch that?
I don't know. Maybe it depends on the talent. Like if you're going to tell me it's Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal,
sounds like it will be.
Yeah, then maybe for high profile events, at least. I don't know how sustainable it is, 52 weeks a year or however long they're trying to do it. But it's something. I mean, again, it just fits into that. We have these guys under contract. We might as well use them. Right. So I think it makes sense to at least try it.
I'll be curious how much they air inside the NBA on their own. I don't know if that will continue to happen, but just to say, hey, there's basketball on tonight. Our show is on. Watch us instead. Kind of, like, ESPN does on Sunday mornings, like maybe they'll just kind of have that, like, the NFL show that ESPN produces. I don't know, again, if people will watch it, but what they do with the rest of the weeks that it's not on ESPN and how they just kind of deploy this talent now that they don't have the sport that these guys cover is going to be fascinating. I have one last quick one, which is Amazon and NBC. They don't get inside the NBA. They don't get Charles Barkley and Shaq and Ernie and Kenny. They got to pivot elsewhere. I'm still optimistic that they can get creative, and the more the merrier here, but I'm sure executives in those places are like, great, ESPN gets more of the best guys. Fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that's fine for them. I think, look, I mean, inside the NBA is closer to ending than it was to starting, right? Like, this is not a show that's probably going to be around a decade from now, and so at least not in this form. And so if you're Amazon and NBC, like I would welcome, obviously it would have been a huge get to get inside the NBA to kick off your NBA partnership, but like, to have to start from scratch, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world.
Did you have any more, or are we
through
with our winners and losers?
Yeah, no, I think it was a lot of winners. It was kind of hard that's why I kind of tried to force feed ESPN in there. But I think this was like, when I broke it down, like, it's really a 3-team trade, and even the Big 12 comes out of it like all the better. So I think this was a deal that ultimately made sense for all parties involved. All right, let's get into our and finally segment, our final topic of the day. And finally, Brendon, are you on Bluesky?
I am. I've been on Bluesky for like a year and a half, I think, technically.
That's how I was.
Still spending more time on X, I think, if I'm being honest with myself, than I am on Bluesky. Yeah.
So, I mean, look, I don't think I have to set this up too much. If you're listening this far into the podcast, you know the deal. Like, people are leaving X. I've stopped calling it Twitter, by the way. Like, I just decided, like, it's time to stop doing the formerly known as Twitter. Like, it's X, just call it X. But people are leaving X. People don't like Elon Musk. He changed the terms of service, some sketchy stuff in there about AI and having the ability to basically mine your tweets, it sounds like, to help engineer their AI program Grok. And look, I think a lot of it's just probably the fallout from the election. People saw how involved Elon Musk was in Donald Trump's campaign. They see how involved he still is when it comes to the Trump incoming administration. And I don't
Are we selling Teslas, by the way, too?
Yeah, I don't know. And so I've seen more Cybertrucks on the road lately.
Yeah,
so
I feel like that aspect of the Elon Musk is, so there's no Bluesky for Cybertrucks. So unfortunately, those are still getting picked up regardless. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that's why this is happening.
Yeah, and so we've seen this kind of, I don't even know if it's an exodus from Twitter. There have definitely been people who have left Twitter, but a lot of people joining Bluesky. You'll see a lot of posts saying, hey, I'm over on Bluesky. I'm like you. Like, I had an account from probably 18 months ago, and I just kind of reactivated it because I had FOMO and didn't like everybody else, building their followings over there. I tried it for like a week, man. I'm always skeptical of a Twitter alternative because I think so many people have so much already invested in their own Twitter accounts. It's like, you don't like moving. People hate moving, right? It's annoying. This is just moving, but it's on social media. And so I understand the hesitations about X. And look, I think X was a better place before it was owned by Elon Musk. And I definitely understand the hesitations about the new terms of service and all that. But I just think if we're ever going to actually leave X, it's not going to be for an alternative. We're just going to give up on worldwide message boards and go back to like the Scout message boards or Reddit or something. I tried it and like NFL Sunday was my big test case for like, can I live tweet NFL Sunday on Bluesky? And the engagement just wasn't there. I mean, there are people on it, but not enough people for it to give me that fully immersive experience.
You refresh your feed and like 3 posts pop up. Like that's kind of the stage that we're at. And I follow a few hundred people. I mean, not as many as I do on X, but it's not as if I'm sitting there just hoping for thin air to, provide content for me. I'm trying, I'm doing the thing, and it's just not really there. But your point is exactly where I was going to go, which is when we talk about an exodus from X or anything like that, exodus, as some people are very cleverly calling it, it already happened, and it's the reason Elon Musk bought the damn thing. People stopped using this website. Regular people have not used X in 5 years, for the most part. I noticed a fall off basically once people started going outside again in like 2021. You know, like I cover the Suns. A lot of my followers are Suns fans, local people in Phoenix that care about basketball and stuff like that. And I would post the same types of things I always did. Less likes, less replies, less everything, even before Elon Musk bought it. And yes, it's been more precipitous since then. And now if you're not paying for subscription or for verification and subscription and all that, you get devalued. I do think the thing of disincentivizing the links didn't get enough attention at the time. Just the fact that people's the work that they're putting out in a site that is increasingly just sort of controlled by media you can't get your work out there. I think that went a long way toward bothering people. But I don't know. I mean, I have probably some thoughts on this that are not necessarily for the play-by-play, but just, I guess just to put a little sprinkle of it out there, there are definitely people that are doing this for partisan reasons politically, and that's no secret if you spend any time on Bluesky. It's this whole cheerleading kind of circle jerk about we're leaving the bad place and here's the good place and we're going to make it what we want it to be. It's impossible to ignore, so I feel like it is relevant. I just don't see a world living in a state that broke different ways this last election, having a lot of friends and family that are all sorts of views. The kind of sanctimoniousness of I'm actually taking the high road by not engaging with people that disagree with me. I just fundamentally disagree with that. And it's really been a turnoff being on Bluesky, if I'm being 100% honest, where people want to be patted on the back for ignoring people and being more polarized. I'm like, that's not the solution, folks. I don't think that's going to do what you think that it's going to do. So that really has made me hesitant to go over there and are we building this utopia? Is that really the goal here? I kind of just want to go back to when we fucked around about sports. That's kind of my goal. Can we just keep it at that, please?
Yeah, we saw this with Threads a year ago. Was every time one of these alternatives launches, it's a real we are the world vibes. It's
yeah.
Everybody's good vibes, good energy, all this. Let's leave the trolls over there. And it's the trolls are kind of part of what make Twitter. The trolls are part of the deal. It's that's why I was so curious to see an NFL Sunday, because as a Browns fan, that's a war zone. And so I was curious how that would carry over to Bluesky, and it really didn't carry over. I was I kind of need the chaos. But yeah, I hear you on so we're just going to avoid each other altogether. That's what we're going to do.
We'll just have not only our own realities of fact and fiction, but we'll talk about it in completely separate places too. Great. That sounds like a solution.
But there's also a part of me that wonders well, that's what happened with cable news, right? People watch cable news based on their own partisanship. And so was it just inevitable we were going to get to this point with social media? So I don't know, but I agree. I just don't, either Twitter is going to have to totally collapse, or because the thing with Facebook, right? People use Facebook less than they did 10 years ago. It's not like people went to a Facebook alternative. They just got sick of using Facebook. They found other, like
it's
Instagram.
TikTok, it's Reddit, it's whatever.
Right. They didn't find a one of one of Facebook. They didn't go back to MySpace or something and so I'm very wary of any social media platform that's trying to copy exactly what Twitter's doing, because I think you're either you're not going to be able to do it, or you're just inevitably going to run into the same problem. So,
and Twitter's not going to go away because it's just a loss leader for Elon Musk. It's the same thing we say with Amazon and sports rights. They can always outbid everybody, and they could lose money every step of the way, and it won't affect their bottom line because they're too big to fail. Elon Musk, it's a line item for him. So it's never going to die. And you just have to decide if you want to be on it or not. I don't care if anyone leaves, but it's not going to stop being popular because, some NBA writers go post somewhere else, you know?
I am like on the extreme side of Twitter users. Like I'm very well aware of that. And like a lot of my life and a lot of my career has been because of Twitter. And I'm pretty aware of that. But normal people don't use Twitter. I think you're right about that. Like my normie friends, like if I try to tell them on Twitter, I sound like the biggest freak in the world. It's so weird. It's so funny to have like such different realities like working in your head.
And it's kind of always been like that. I think it's just gotten more over time.
Yeah. I was listening to this wrestling podcast and they were talking about this. It's the Post Wrestling podcast. And they were talking about this exact conversation. And they were just talking about Twitter though. And I know it's like popular to say like Twitter's not real life, and it's not. But it is funny. Like think about how many arguments you get on Twitter and how many arguments you get in real life. And it's like, it's just totally they don't compare. So I thought that was a funny point. All right. We've been doing this for an hour. Let's get into our hot mic. You want to kick us off?
Sure. Our little thing that caught our attention or caught our eye each week. And mine is Barstool hiring Jon Gruden. And we will stay as, we won't end on another dour note after the Bluesky conversation, but nothing about this surprised me. The Jon Gruden kind of waiting period and resurfacing has been underway for this whole NFL season, basically. I thought Dan Patrick did a decent job of trying to at least get him to answer for why his intentions here and where the lawsuit stands against the NFL based on the leaked emails that led to his firing in Las Vegas and all that sort of stuff. We're not really getting answers there. I guess he's just back and that is what it is. But it was some pretty significant charged language that led to this. This wasn't like a slip up where he said one thing and taken out of context. Like this was a lot. And you can say that the emails, they were related to the investigation of Daniel Snyder in Washington. Gruden was just sort of a bystander and somebody may have had an intention to cancel him by getting them out there and all this sort of stuff. And I might even agree with you, but it just would be crazy if this just happens without a hitch and all Jon Gruden had to do was basically get paid by the Raiders for a while, go away, and now he's back like he never left. I don't even care that it's Barstool, really. It's just that the sanitation of it has just been so fast and no one's really talking about it.
Well, I mean, he was consulting with NFL teams last year, right? He was a consultant for the Saints. He was linked to, I think, offensive coordinator jobs or head coaching jobs even, at least at the college level. And so like, as much as like it would be easy to pin this on Barstool, like he's been normalized. Like it's like, right. We have like this weird, like there are people who are definitely canceled. There are people who you would think would get canceled and then just totally, skate. And then there's this like weird purgatory where people are canceled by, I hate talking about, like, I hate using the word canceled, like unironically, by the way, but like he's in this weird purgatory where it seems like maybe he should be canceled, but like he hasn't been canceled by the NFL. He's still getting media jobs. And so
my issue with people in that kind of in-between zone is always just that I just think that they owe it to everybody to say something. And it feels like he is sort of using the the legal proceedings and kind of, I can't comment as a little bit of cover for himself. And that's the part of it that I think bothers me is like, I'm by far on not the most extreme, shut everybody down, fire them, get them out of the world and never hear from them again if they make one mistake camp. But I also think that person has to show me that they're like, regret what they did, or maybe that they have changed their views in some kind of way. I mean, I think what he said was pretty fucked up. So it's kind of rough to just see him being like, let's do a live stream with PFT commenter. It's like, bro, like, could you say something about, like, address the elephant in the room at least,
Yeah, I've kind of just avoided it, not out of convenience. He's just like not for me. Like it's just too shticky and it's too. I have a lot of friends who are like, "Oh, Gruden on Barstool's awesome." Like I'm just like, he's not for me. Like I've kind of canceled him in my own mind, and in part because of what he said, and in part because I find him annoying. So, can leave it there.
Fair enough.
All right, my hot mic. Going back to pro wrestling, the Wrestling Observer newsletter, which is run by Dave Meltzer, had its annual Hall of Fame edition this week. And I actually find this really fascinating because there is no pro wrestling Hall of Fame, really. I mean, there are pro wrestling Hall of Fames, but like the WWE's is a complete entertainment vehicle. Like that's Donald Trump's in the WWE's, like Kid Rock is in it. Like it's just a vehicle to promote some legends and some celebrities every WrestleMania. So that's not like a legitimate Hall of Fame. The Wrestling Observer newsletter does a legitimate Hall of Fame. Like they follow basically baseball rules. They break it down by region and category. You have to get X amount of votes over a certain amount of time to even stay on the ballot. There is some stuff where Dave Meltzer, who runs it, picks and chooses, and it's kind of arbitrary who stays on and who comes back after a certain number of years. But for the most part, like this is even there. I mean, Dave Meltzer is very polarizing in the wrestling media space. Everyone pretty much unanimously views this as like the legitimate pro wrestling Hall of Fame. And so they had their issue this week. And it was interesting. There were actually some modern guys who got in, most notably Roman Reigns and the Young Bucks. And so it's just my hot mic isn't really even, them getting in, although I am a big Roman Reigns fan. But like just the idea that this guy is running like what is considered pro wrestling's legitimate Hall of Fame and all of the arguments and debates that pop up each year, I think that's a lot of fun. So I wanted to call some attention to that.
That's cool. I honestly had no idea. I mean, I know it's such a regionalized product that it doesn't surprise me to hear, or at least historically it kind of was pre-WWE, and there's been competitors along the way. So it's not a huge surprise. But I did not know that he ran such an authoritative one. I hope that there is some kind of like, does he put it in a book or something? Like I want there to be some kind of physical, I don't want it to just be like in an email server somewhere.
There's a Wikipedia page for it. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I'm guessing
You need it in the Library of Congress is what I'm trying to say here. That's where I'm going.
Dave isn't always the best with technology, so I might have to shoot somebody over there a note. And that's a pretty good suggestion. I might have to pass that one along.
I'll get the government on it. You get them hooked up.
Doge.
All right. That'll wrap us up. Visit awfulannouncing.com. Hit subscribe or follow wherever you are finding us to keep up with the play-by-play. We're here for you every single Wednesday. We have some interviews in the pipeline. The news never slows down. We're also on social media. Wherever you're finding us, whenever you're finding us, a big thank you, and we'll see you next week.